So a lot of my last 8 years has been with working with companies, starting in India, expanding in India, going through certain turbulent times. So today in the next 20, 25 minutes, and I'll try to keep it very short because I would love to hear from everybody and what has their experience been and see how much we could make it more engaging. I'll just give you a quick background of my last 8 years, the work that I've done. So in the next slides, you would see that. So if you could help me move the slide, please. We did a research with a company about 1.5 years back, and this was to work in all international companies. There were approximately around 100 companies that we spoke with to understand what were the challenges in India. And these are all various business sizes, but all international companies. And what's interesting is beyond 10 years, you would still see a structure of human resources, whether it was focused on operational or strategic. But less than 6 years, human resources was not a focus. And in all the companies that we spoke with, less than about 8% of them had a formalized role of human resources. In the next slide, you would see when we asked them a question, what are the challenges in human resources? And this is what they had to say. So when we ask them, what are your current people challenges? And there are no points for guessing it. It was recruitment and retention. What became interesting is when we shifted gears and asked them, so what do you think would be a roadblock or the biggest challenge you would foresee if you were to expand or to grow and meet whatever your objectives for the next 3 or 4 years were? And retention took over, and they said retaining employees is going to be the biggest challenge we have to somehow manage. So just giving a context of whether you're entering into India or you are being in India, these are some challenges that you will experience. In my next slide, I talk about, I'm trying to keep it very simple, making it so the topic is not really simple, but I attempt to keep it very real. So here is a case we've been working with this client for very long now. Now they set up a manufacturing setup in Ahmedabad. They hired a plant manager. The plant manager went through multiple rounds of interviews. Also did go to the head office to meet them in person. Just about 20 a month before he was expected to join, he called us and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't join. I've been retained by previous employer." What a bummer it was. But it did give us insights that what's happening with the organization, what's happening with our hiring process. And this becomes very peculiar when you were to hire in India. And the reason is, so in the next slide that you see that I've just tried kind of putting things together that what could be the reason that the offer got rejected. Indian market, when it comes to finding talent, is a very, very competitive market. You probably would not be the only one who's out there hiring for the skill sets. It's very competitive. Every time that you're meeting up with a candidate, don't be surprised if he is already sitting on 1 or 2 offers. Therefore, for your job, for your role, for the company to stand out, there has to be certain things more that needs to go into it. So you need to, when you're starting up in India, hiring in India, you would need to have a very strong database. That goes without, there's no, you need a very, very strong pipeline. But I'm going to move beyond it. And I say it's other than just the database and pipeline, whether you're going through networking events or your own networking or your own events or more trade fairs, not last year, but you may have met good people. So keeping them in a pipeline, but more than just that database, how are you engaging with your right talent? And not the ones who are actively looking for jobs, but how are you reaching out to very passive talent? And there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn from consumer product companies, e-commerce and tech. The way they engage the potential candidates is amazing. They have programs, forums, tech companies have hackathons, which are sponsored with great events being given out. And the idea is to find that talent. The idea is to engage with the pool. And this is also branding exercise being used. So when it comes to a B2B target, this becomes slightly more difficult because one, this is a new style of engaging with your potential candidates, but it's also the candidates are not out there on your social media or your social networks or platforms. How do you reach out? That's when you need a team that is going to scout out. So a team that is doing your search needs to also start mapping organizations and mapping talents and seeing how have they moved. The other thing that I've seen has proven to be very, very successful for a lot of companies is about getting their salary points ready. Most often in the last 8, 10 years, I've seen salaries are negotiated, and not just salaries, designations also get negotiated. Um, the entire offer is up for negotiation. So it makes sense that you get a good, quick, deep understanding of what is that I'm going to pay for my skill sets. Companies who are going to enter India are definitely going to pay a premium than the averages. However, the challenge if you're already in India, it's highly recommended that a salary benchmarking study, some form of study is being done on a very regular basis. This has a very high correlation to also retaining your employees. And it's paradoxical when I say money, but it's like I'm not looking at money as a factor for motivating people to stay, but I'm looking at money, the salary, the cash component as a hygiene factor. If you do not make it appropriate uh, to the skill sets, you're likely to lose people. But if you were to pay higher, it is no guarantee you're going to retain people by paying more money. And we will step into that in my next slide. So you would see that motivating employees is also the biggest concern that we saw in the research that we had done. I put a very simple example here. A company, we had hired a sales head. Our client, the first employee, very, very passionate about building the business, grew the business to a very large extent in a matter of 2 to 3 years. He put a team together, got his dealer networks together, has got the name out, the brand out, and there was a lot of traction for the product. Somewhere down the line, there was a change in reporting manager, and that's when the trouble started in Paradise. A lot of concerns. He would raise concerns. The issues were there. He would start openly rejecting or showcasing disapproval for systems, reporting, procedures. Uh, I think they worked really well for 2 years in such a bad situation. Eventually came a time when the employee quit. And it was also at the same time when the management was deciding how do we now work with this. This is a very, very classic case of a conflict. And uh, how I'm looking at this conflict is at multitude levels. It's not only intrapersonal, it could be also conflict of um, just the personalities and not the relationship per se. But moving to my next slide, I just tried putting things together that if this is what's happening, that a small change can lead to exits, then what is working in the background? My next slide, I put down certain things that could potentially be a deterrent. Atul, just help me put to the next slide, please. So here, when I look at this, and I'm just being very conscious of not oversimplifying this situation because it's not about solving a symptom, which is what I see as a conflict, but it's also about understanding what are the causes that are leading to those symptoms or those conflicts. And this is rigor, but in and that's not what we have. We don't have much time here, but just to give you things that what I have seen is it's usually at a surface when you see a conflict, but it's much deeper. It could be at a interpersonal level, it could be at a structural level as well. And you need to be very careful of how to do this. Whatever changes, improvements you're going to make to a situation may have ramifications. So it's worthwhile to devote some time and do some understanding of this. But I've also seen things that companies are doing that is helping them mitigate this risk much better. and they're helping them being prepared much better. The first thing that they talk about is whenever there's going to be a structure being put in. And here I am being reflective of a structure, irrespective of whether you're coming into India or you're already in India. It's worthwhile to spend some time and devote how is this structure going to evolve when your business grows. And not something that you necessarily need to communicate, but it is important to have structures thought through. How would my project phase? Project would be my incubation. Let's look at about 0 to 3 years. How would my regular business as usual structure look like? Are the people going to remain the same throughout these structures? It's worthwhile to devote some time to put that blueprint in place. I don't recommend you having that chat right away, but it is important to make very clear and communicate the expectations of both phases clearly to the team who's there. Um, we've seen, and I think it was very well emphasized by Adela and Madhav, that there is a need for a structure, there's a need for hierarchy, there's a need to appreciate that Indian team need to have a strong leadership. Now, I'm conscious to say leadership not as a position or as a person, but I'm conscious to say that it's a role that is required. You need that role of consolidation. You need that role that somebody who could be accessed very easily, somebody who could go back and get their problem solved, supported, just little guidance. That role is required. And just giving you a context of why is it required, because that's something I've been thinking about. Why? I mean, when the entire organizations in the world is moving to self-managed teams, why is that this still remains as a need? Just 2 more minutes, maybe I'll just step back and tell you that this is needed because that's how we are culturally. Our culture is very paternalistic. We'd like to galvanate to one unified or a visible source of power. And in organizations terminology, that could be a leader, that could be somebody who's been positioned in that, or is a role somebody is holding. But that's important. The second part is that we as an organization, as a culture, like to uh, uh, to have a very familial view, feeling, that feeling of being heard, that feeling of being together, that sense of being in a team, belonging, is very important. And that feeling is usually adopted by the leader. So you would see the leadership in India, the style of management is very support. They would like to build a lot of relationships, to get people to look up to them, to invest time, and that is what they desire. At the same time, there are ramifications on the other side, but that's not the chat we'll do today. But that's the basis of why you need a unified source of power. The connection is also something which is very important. The need to belong is very strong. It's a very, very strong anchor for Indian teams. We'd like to belong to the team, to our to my functions, to the set to belongingness to an organization. And here is a tip: if you're entering in it into India and you're building a brand, that's a huge belongingness that you will see a lot of Indian employees show. Because working for an international company is a big high, and if the company is also reciprocating it in terms of investing in me, my growth, my family, is building those relationships, is a huge, strong anchor to get your employees to stay longer. I don't think 10 minutes could do justice to the topic of motivation managing, but I'm still giving, I hope you're catching some clues here. Motivation doesn't come because the person's motivated. Of course, you need to hire motivated people, you need to do that, but it also gets hugely compromised or impacted by how much of clarity is there in the organization, how much of support is the organization willing to give the employee, and is there a mechanism to listen to your employees? That entire sense of feeling safe, that psychological need to feel safe, I'm working with a trusted team, the team I can bank on, that is very important. So if actions around, if you were to take some policy decisions or people decisions, do be mindful of how this is going to impact the motivation, which eventually is really what makes people continuously to work harder. So if I was to very broadly conclude, while these topics are global, at a very high level, you need somebody who's doing the groundwork. You need that on the ground actions. You need somebody who's running around talking to employees, making sure that's happening. If it is you, like in Adela's case, she's making that effort, great. And sustainability is that the need of the hour then. If not, then please do invest in that piece, whether it's outsourced, hired, somebody who's on the ground and connecting to your employees. And you would have, I'll point it back to the research that we did. Most of the companies don't have that position or a role that is looking after human resources. And it doesn't come to a surprise to me because in the last 9 years, I honestly haven't seen a human resource position being hired as the first two positions to be hired. But human resources challenges are the most common challenges a lot of companies are facing. So on that note, I'd like to use my next time to just have a lot of engagement through questions. If you have, please do write questions to me. I'll be happy to take them. Yeah. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the chat.